University, and we work to create a cohesive graduate student community by organizing social and professional development events aimed at improving the graduate experience for the department students. My name is Mithun Gautam. I'm a PhD candidate, and I've been working in various capacities for Mega over the last 3 years. Nehal Jajal, Abhishek Appana, Fariha Haq, and Jennifer Rajavedanayagam, who are also part of this panel as co-hosts. They have also been working with us at Mega and have been instrumental in setting up this session. So thank you for that. This webinar is targeted to PhD students contemplating their next steps who are curious to see if a postdoc is a good pursuit. We'll be covering topics like why do a postdoc, what are its advantages and disadvantages, how to search for a postdoc, when is it the right time to start looking, and so on. We're also open to questions from the audience, so please feel free to use the chat to ask your questions. We're quite excited to have a diverse panel of both faculty and postdocs. So Dr. Carlos Castro is an associate professor, the Ralph W. Kurtz Chair in the department, the director of the Laboratory for Nanoengineering and Biodesign, and is the associate chair for research. Actually, at one of Mega's coffee donut sessions last month, Dr. Castro initiated the conversation about hosting such a panel discussion based on his experience holding such sessions for his lab. And we worked with him to set up this discussion, and he helped us finalize the panel as well. So thank you. And if you'd like to introduce yourself as well, your background and some postdoc experience.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Nathan. So yeah, good to see everyone. Looks like Marcello just joined too. Hey, Marcello. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll introduce myself briefly. So I've been at Ohio State as a faculty member for almost 13 years now. Before that, I did do a postdoc. I did a postdoc at the Technical University of Munich. I'm kind of going backwards in chronological order. Maybe I should go forwards. Let me take a step back. So I did my bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering here at Ohio State. Then I did my PhD at MIT in mechanical engineering. And I was really interested in academic career, and that's part of the reason I did a postdoc, but I went on to do a postdoc at the Technical University of Munich. And then came back here in 2011 to start as a faculty member in the department. Yeah, so I really enjoyed my postdoc. You know, I had the experience of going to a different country for a postdoc. I know a couple of the other panelists also have that experience, so you know I can answer questions about that. And maybe just very briefly for me, other than like the really fun, exciting cultural experience and personal experience, that's equally important in my opinion. It was a really wonderful professional experience, and actually, I'll just say, you know, a large fraction of what we do now in my lab is really geared, you know, more than half of what we do is kind of built off of my postdoctoral research experience rather than my PhD research experience. We combine a lot, but it was really valuable for me to gain a new expertise.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions that are quite related to what you just said, so I'll get to them soon. But we're also excited to have with us Dr. Marcello Canova, who is a professor at the department, the Graduate Studies Committee Chair, and the Associate Director for Graduate and Continuing Education at the Center for Automotive Research. He has been actively assisting us with organizing the programs at Mega for engaging the graduate student community. And if you would like to introduce yourself in particular about your background and postdoc experience.
Yeah, thank you, Mithun, for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be part of this exciting event. Very similar to Carlos, I had a pretty interesting story, actually. So not many of you know, but I don't have a single degree from American university. So I started as a PhD student in Italy. And as part of my PhD program, I did an exchange at the Center for Automotive Research here at Ohio State. And that turned out to be half of the duration of my PhD program. I did my dissertation over here with Giorgio. And then I came back home, I defended with my suitcase. And the day after the defense, I came back to CAR as a postdoc. And so I did about 4 years of a postdoc at Ohio State. Was working with Giorgio, and maybe a few of you remember Professor Jan Gudzenek from thermodynamics. And then in 2009, 2010, I became faculty here in Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. So I could say that all of my career has been at Ohio State.
Great. Thank you. We also have with us postdoc scholars, starting with Dr. Wolfgang Pfeifer, who also works at the Nanoengineering and Biodesign Laboratory. If you could introduce yourself for the audience.
Hey, yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share some of my experiences here. Hopefully in a useful way, and people might get only the best out of those yeah things I have to share. So I studied in Germany. I got all my undergrad degrees in Germany, bachelor's and master's. And then also got my PhD in Germany, where I started working on DI nanotech. I then moved on eventually to come to the Ohio State University in early 2020. So my postdoc experience is also heavily affected by the COVID pandemic, which might give it like a slightly different touch than, for example, Carlos's postdoc experience has been. I am still here and I'm still enjoying my job and my work here. So it still has been a good experience for me. And well, I'm, let's say, currently looking at or like aiming to finish my course postdoctoral time here and then moving on, ideally like getting in a faculty position. So well, it's like 4 years, almost 4 years now that I've been here. So I might have like, yeah, quite some experience, at least when it comes to postdoc at the Ohio State University. Yeah, well, happy to share that.
Great, thank you. We also have Dr. Anjelica Kucinic, who is a postdoc at the mechanical department while simultaneously a lecturer at the chemical and biomolecular engineering department. She also works with the Nanoengineering and Biodesign Laboratory. If you could say a few words about your background.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for letting me join as a panelist. I did my undergraduate in chemical engineering at Ohio State and started research with Carlos through Ohio Mod, a biomolecular design group at Ohio State. I continued to finish my PhD in the nanoengineering and biodesign lab as well, and just graduated in August. I'm postdocing now in this lab for the rest of this week, and then I lectured this semester for chemical engineering capstone this semester, where I was a TA throughout my PhD, but I'm actually leaving at the end of the month for a postdoc in France. So I accepted an international postdoc. So if you have questions on that and how that process kind of works, I accepted that back in May. So I was in talks for a while, and then leaving in December, a few months after I graduated.
Great, thank you. We actually do have an exact question related to this postdoc international experience. I'll get to that. We also have with us Dr. Mehmet Ozkan, who works closely with Dr. Canova at the Center for Automotive Research. If you could tell us about your background, please.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you for meeting for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. I hope everyone can benefit from this talk. I got my undergrad in Turkey, and I came back and I got the United States for master degree. And after completion my master degree, then I started my PhD degree. Then last summer, I finished my PhD and I joined to Ohio State and working at the Center for Automotive Research and started working with Dr. Canova. He's my manager, I would say. So I have been working on this in this role, and which is similar to that what I was doing during my PhD work, but except a different area that I have been working on it. What I would say, and now in this position, I can explore more different area than what I've been working on in my PhD and building skills to open on it. And I would like to answer your question, guys, if you have anything regarding the transition from PhD to postdoc for just a newly fresh PhD graduate student.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have our postdoctoral scholar, Dr. James Tan, who's also the President's postdoctoral scholar and is mentored by Dr. Shaurya Prakash in collaboration with Dr. Matthew Sullivan. If you could please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of the baby of this group because I just started my postdoc 2 months ago. Yeah, I graduated. Oh, this is so funny. I graduated from the University of Michigan, actually. So I did my undergrad and my PhD there. So I was there for 11 years. Never thought I'd ever be at Ohio State. Like, honestly speaking, like I was like, why would I go to Columbus? That's where everyone tells me it's the worst place to be. But after I talked to Shaurya and Matt, getting connected to them, I really liked both, like the collaborations that were going on between the two of them. Thought it was a really good opportunity for what I was interested in doing and my expertise, and applied for the presidential postdoctoral scholars program with them. And then thankfully that worked out, and then I ended up here. So never thought I'd be here, but here I am. So if you have any questions about the PPSP program, or I guess just I'm pretty fresh from that whole process. So any questions about that, I'm happy to answer that too.
Well, thank you and welcome to Columbus. It's pretty awesome if you ask me. But thank you all. And now, without further ado, let's get started with the topics. So a lot of these questions were raised by participants when they registered for this webinar. But again, if any of the participants have any additional questions, please feel free to use the chat or just unmute yourself and speak. So starting off with the first question, and this is open to everyone. Why do a postdoc? Who should do it? What are its advantages and how does it compare with a PhD?
Should we go in any order? Marcello, you can start, Marcello.
Okay, I can start. So I can speak from, actually, let me put it this way. I can speak from a point of view of having served in many search committee for faculty searches. So the postdoc, I think if it's done well, and I will clarify in a moment, it can really boost your opportunities to find faculty positions, because it's a valuable. Sorry, this is Kevin. He has a PhD too. So it really provides a lot of opportunities to not only continue with your line of research, so continue to publish a steady stream of paper, journal, and conferences, but it also provides you, and this depends on the lab and the supervisor, it provides you the opportunity to experience dimensions that normally you would not be able to do during the PhD, which is proposal writing, mentoring of students, and the project management task, and also multitasking in managing multiple research projects. So these are skills that maybe at the beginning of a career of an assistant professor are not super important, but after 2 or 3 years, as you're establishing your research program, they become absolutely critical to ensure, sustainability and growth. And, many times nowadays, the PhD it's still 5 years, but it's very quick, meaning you're working on your research, you're taking a lot of classes, and then all of a sudden you begin being super productive. You write papers, you attend conferences, you write a dissertation, and you're finished before you know it. So many PhD students jump into academic position right away, and the first feeling they get is that they are incredibly lost, because there is a lot of freedom, a lot of opportunities. I think the postdoc, a couple of years of postdoc in a reputable program, do really give you that opportunity to take a step back and acquire skills, mostly like project management, multitasking, that are so important as you transition in the second, third, and fourth year of your faculty position.
Thank you. I kind of want to bring back the question you mentioned if done right. So what did you mean by that?
So I've had experiences with some students who end up in doing postdocs in labs of even very famous faculty in like MIT or Berkeley or so. But what they end up doing is they end up working on a single project. They don't see the professor or the lab lab leader like maybe for a month or two, because like there is a super like a world famous professor is traveling the world, and he spends maybe 2 days a month in the lab. And so this experience has been particularly frustrating. So in some cases, some of these super large and famous labs and famous professors, they hire postdocs to basically manage projects. And so they manage projects as a one person doing the entire work. And there is the expectation that the postdoc is capable of doing everything without any supervision. So maybe, this is a great opportunity for a faculty to, leverage the ability and the skill of an experienced postdoc. But I don't think personally it's a meaningful and rewarding experience for the student themselves, because, they will just continue to work on a single research project and not have, in my opinion, the opportunity that you need to diversify and understand, the challenges of having to manage multiple projects or multiple activities, and also expand your horizons.
Thank you. Dr. Castro, you had something.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Marcello said. I think the couple things I would maybe add are postdoc is certainly, I would say now, the more typical track towards the academic faculty position at a research intensive university. Professor Canova and I have the experience of having sat on some search committees, and I would say most of the applicants probably have some kind of postdoctoral experience, and not always, but oftentimes of the applicants that rise to the top, again, oftentimes it's applicants with postdoctoral experience, because you've had that chance to boost your record, to publish more papers, to expand your network and your skill set. So yeah, I agree with all that. Maybe the couple of small things I would add, postdoc is probably more common to do towards an academic career track. Although I think now there are many postdocs that end up still going to industry, and I think there are maybe specific types of postdocs that you could do that could be very beneficial for certain industry career tracks. In particular, for example, like a technology-minded startup or something a postdoc might be a very good route towards that. And then I think the other thing, again, for some of us, it was for me in particular, it was an opportunity to really gain a pretty new skill set that I thought quite complementary to the stuff I was doing previously. Although now, what we do now in the lab is much closer to what I did in the postdoc. But in theory, the two are quite complementary. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Would someone among the postdocs like to pitch in as well?
Maybe I can speak. I mean, like I said, I haven't been in my postdoc very long, but even when I talked to my PhD advisor about it at Michigan, one thing that she said that really struck me was that she felt like the postdoc period was the most fun period of her life, in the sense that during your PhD, you have many other responsibilities, right? You have to take courses, you have to teach, and kind of like what Professor Canova said, like it happens so fast, and you're just out of the door, and you don't really have that much time to dedicate towards really doing the projects you want to do or the things you're interested in doing. And so she said, and then when you become a faculty, you have other things too. You have other administrative duties. You have to teach, of course, and that can be also really, busy starting up a lab. But the postdoc is really a time that you can really center in on things you want to do and think are interesting. And I think when you put it in that perspective, it just seems really appealing.
Maybe just briefly seconding this, as someone who has already like a few years as a postdoc now here at Ohio State, it's absolutely true that during my time here I had lots of freedom, and that of course might also depend on your particular supervisor, and I might have been quite lucky with that. And I'm not saying this only because Carlos is also part of this panel, but like I can really like basically choose projects and like dig into things, into projects and directions that I find interesting, and it's quite often, at least in my opinion, like when you start your PhD, you don't necessarily understand the full scope of your project. You are probably somewhat interested in that work, and then you start doing that and you become more and more an expert in it, but you are still like somewhat tied to this project you have like initially started with, and maybe some other work starts to be more appealing for you, towards you. But as a postdoc, like yeah, you just have way more freedom when it comes to those like scientific directions, and that's something like I really enjoyed so far here.
Great, thank you. So I think there's a lot of clarity on like why do a postdoc and how does it differ from the PhD and how you get that freedom to explore what you want to be doing in the future. A question that I've kind of built up based on the discussion and also the questions that we got from the registered participants is, for a postdoc, what does the application package typically include? What kind of profile do you need when you're looking for an R1 institute or some Ivy League college?
Can I just clarify when you say what kind of profile do you need looking for R1 or Ivy League? Is that for a postdoc or like down the road for a faculty position?
So if you're just finishing your PhD and you're applying for a postdoc, what kind of profile should you have? That is, how many journal papers and like conferences and so on, if you want to be going to an R1 institute or an Ivy League, is the question.
I mean, I can start this. I would say it varies quite a bit, and it varies quite a bit from field to field. Certainly, having a strong record will be helpful. You know, I think, but whether you want, you know, 6, 7 papers or 2 or 3 papers, that's going to vary in the field. And I think in some cases, having, you know, 2 or 3, you know, strong impact papers, that can be defined differently in different fields. That sort of, you know, if you have that, then I think you're in a good position to get a good postdoc. You know, then yeah, some labs may be looking for someone who has 8, 9, 10 papers. I don't think that's the norm. I would say if you have 2 or 3, you know, good strong papers, maybe a co-author on a couple other things, you know, a strong history of attending and going to conferences, then I think you're probably in pretty good shape. And you know, oftentimes what you know, maybe speaking from myself and what I've seen from, you know, other people going from the lab into postdoc positions, I think oftentimes what people are looking for is a good fit, a good background, a good motivated interest, right? Someone that's really can come into the lab and contribute, but also is a good fit in terms of the lab culture and can help mentor people in the lab and things like that.
Yeah. If I can, yeah, that I definitely, if I can add something to what Carlos mentioned, those are all valid points. There are 2 aspects that I think are really critical in the search for a postdoc position. Don't underestimate the number of postdoc positions that are materialized out of nowhere because your advisor talks to another advisor at a conference. So postdoc positions are really poorly advertised for a reason, because we don't like to open them to everybody, but we want to make sure that we find the right person. Also, from an HR standpoint, requesting or activating a postdoc position is a matter of weeks, as opposed to a faculty search committee that requires a year of planning. So even, even if there are no positions available, it is quite possible that if you go at a conference and you are an advisor, meet another professors, and there is a good relationship between them, there will be a position materializing. No, seeing my experience with my PhD students going to postdocs, there is another aspect on top of what Carlos mentioned, and this is the ability of a student to sort of shift or pivot into a new research area. As a faculty, you will have to do it, period. Doesn't matter. Maybe it will happen in 1 year, maybe it will happen in 5 years, but the research that you do at the end of your PhD will not be the research that will get your career award. I can almost guarantee. At some point, you will have to pivot. So, and how do you do that? For example, some students PhD students do internships in national labs or other research institutions. And those internships have the expectation of publishing, like even a conference paper. And these are typically are coming from projects that have nothing to do with what you're doing as part of your PhD. So this is a great way to show that, hey, I'm able to join a new research team and put out a paper in 3 to 4 months of work. So this actually speaks a lot in terms of ability of a student to think outside the box, to sort of reinvent themselves, which is a very important skill that we seek in postdocs, and even more so in a professor or faculty when we're looking for positions.
Thank you. Okay, so let's say that we now understand that for applying for a postdoc, we should have like a certain kind of profile, which is a few good papers that have some good impact factors, and we have demonstrated that we're able to learn quickly and we can do research and work collaboratively and so on. When should a student then start searching for a postdoc, and how do they engage with potential postdoc mentors?
So, I guess, yeah,
No,
Wolfgang,
you can go first if you want, sure.
okay. So I recently went through this. I knew I was graduating in the summer, so I graduated August, defended July. I started making a list probably last fall, so fall of 2022. And Carlos had kind of given me advice to say, make a list of 10, maybe 10, 15 potential people I was interested in working with in different fields. And then have a top 5 that I was really, gonna email and kind of talk to. So I had a few people that I had emailed. I also was looking on Twitter because a lot of professors post on Twitter if they're hiring postdocs. And I had also talked to a professor that Carlos was connected with at a different university. And was it really in the talks with that professor? I wrote that university has like a postdoctoral to faculty transition fellowship. I applied for that. I didn't get it. I met with the professor at a seminar. I, at that time, was also talking to the professor in France, and saw that Twitter post for a while. And because of some of my like life circumstances, I wasn't sure if I could go internationally or not. So the process was kind of long. I would say it was about 6 to 8 months before I actually narrowed down somebody I was working with. And then I ended up accepting the position in France back in May. So I had started talking to them, I think February or March, asked about what the position was like. It's the same field that I'm in, just a little bit of a different wing, I would say. And then accepted the position in May after kind of back and forth. Let me see if this will work. My fiance at the time was doing, my husband now, but doing faculty interviews. So we were seeing if he would get an offer. And then now I'm moving in December. So from May to December, things kind of got crazy. But yeah, did a short-term postdoc with Carlos in that time span of just waiting.
Thank you. And Wolfgang?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny that is maybe to me a little bit that like my experience has been somewhat different to that. So I got my PhD December 2018, and we still had some funding. I still wanted to finish some projects back in my old group, so there wasn't like that much pressure for me to find a new position. And then I eventually and slowly started to like look out into like available positions, and I was pretty like confident and sure like going to a different country, going abroad. And I've basically only sent out 3 applications, and well, got invitations and interviewed for all of them. And I think I might have interviewed with Carlos like maybe early October or so. And I started my position 2.5 months later here, which is probably not like the standard, the common way, especially not moving from Germany like transatlantic to the States. But if you bring some flexibility and well, you feel confident in your plans, that's also possible. So of course it's great if you like do all the research, for example, like Anjelica did in advance, like look out. I'm in contact with other folks, and I mean, it works quite often that way. But it might also be that you just find something on Twitter, like 2 from the 3 positions where I applied, I found on Twitter, and that might be particular to our field, but I'm pretty sure like other fields are using like, let's say those kind of social media as well by now. And then bring some flexibility, and it might be just within a few weeks you live in a different continent, and start there.
Great, thank you.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, James,
Yeah.
what is your opinion?
Yeah, I also would say I started thinking about it kind of a year during that final year of my PhD, but maybe I speak more frankly in the regards that like that final year was a mess, like in terms of I thought I was gonna graduate last summer. Yeah, summer of 2022. Yeah, 2022, and then I ended up graduating January of this year. So that was hard to work around, and I think it was really difficult to do the push of dissertating along with also trying to find postdoc stuff. That was actually really stressful too. And I know that that was the norm for a long time, and I think it still is for a lot of people. But I also hear just from hearing the other postdocs that it's kind of nice to be able to stick around in your previous lab for a little bit after your PhD, to have some time to like finish your dissertation and also push things out from that, but then also like have that breathing room to think about the future then. So, I mean, it may be worth asking your PI if that's something you would like to do. It depends on funding. It depends on a bunch of other situations. So it's definitely a conversation, but I think that's a good idea if you want to maybe take the stress off of trying to figure everything out within that 1 year. Yeah, does that answer the main question, I think?
Yeah, definitely. And to kind of go off on that, especially since you have the presidential fellowship, how did that work out, and what kind of opportunities do you look for when you're applying for the postdoc fellowship? And yeah, any advice?
Oh gosh, I don't know if my situation is like very representative of anyone besides myself, maybe. Like I got connected to, it was Matt Sullivan first. He's in microbiology here at OSU, through one of his postdocs at a conference, international conference. And she had said, I think your work would be really relevant to, what we're doing in the lab. Gave it some thought, had to overcome that thing about, U of M, OSU, whatever. Realized it doesn't matter. And then actually reached out to him an email, and I sent him some ideas I had in applying the things that have some expertise on, or have some ideas on, to what they were studying. And he responded back very enthusiastically. It turned out that he had actually been wanting to work with Shaurya Prakash in mechanical engineering for a long time, but they needed to find someone with a very specific set of the criteria, like an engineer who was interested in microbial ecology, microbiology. It's hard to find that apparently. And then I just came in, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, yeah." So then they looked at my criteria and then thought I was a good applicant for the PPSP program. I don't know, to be honest, I didn't think I was, but I appreciate that they thought that way. So they we went through the process to put together that application. It's quite an intensive application. There's quite a bit of parts to it. It almost felt like a mini faculty application. There's like the diversity statement and like a research statement, and you have to put like a mentorship plan and plans for like how you plan to learn and develop as a postdoc, and submitted that. That was around December, and then I heard back in March, I believe, and then decided to stick around to finish some stuff up at Michigan and come to come to OSU in October. So that's how that timing went out. I didn't really actually. It was more like it was a one and done kind of thing in the regards of, if I didn't get it, I probably would have still have come. So that was my rationale, but I'm thankful I got it. I do think it's probably more wise to think of some choices too, and maybe talk about those possibilities for fellowships with your prospective PIs and put together some of those fellowship packages. I will say though that some of them can be quite beefy though, so like it takes time to put them together. So it depends on your availability and what you think is best for your situation. I can explain more, but maybe that's an overview to start.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So what I'm kind of hearing is that maybe a year before you are expecting to graduate is when you need to be thinking about your essays, your research statement, your diversity statement, and thinking about who should be the faculties, or at least the particular field that you want to be working in. And also I'm hearing a lot that going to conferences and meeting people is a great way to actually get to know about these opportunities, because they're not really advertised as much. So something else that was kind of brought up was a postdoc position with like a guaranteed faculty position after training, and some postdoc positions that do have teaching elements in them. If someone can speak about that.
I can start. I can't say too much, but then maybe others can add. So I think there are it's sort of an increasing trend at universities to have these sort of fellow transition to faculty type programs, where I think universities maybe see this as a way to recruit a really talented person, maybe before they're quite ready to be competitive in a typical faculty application pool. And so I think it can be very helpful from a university standpoint to get talented people sort of into the university, and then then they can grow into collaborations, and they have time to sort of boost their record during the postdoc position. And I think sometimes this type of thing just happens naturally. Maybe I don't know. Maybe in Professor Canova's case, that it's kind of like this, or some other cases. But I think there's now an increasing trend to put some infrastructure around that type of postdoc experience, where you bring someone in. It's a postdoc position, but oftentimes they have maybe a little bit more independence than a typical postdoc might have. I mean, Wolfgang alluded to this. I think you do have, some significant independence as a postdoc, but oftentimes, you might be funded by a particular project. So you have to contribute to that project, and you have some freedom to start new things around that. But in these positions, I think you might even get a little bit of funding, right? And you're sort of developing projects maybe together with someone, right? And I'm not sure. I mean, I would guess these have teaching responsibilities, and probably the one thing that you may not typically get in a postdoc that can be valuable towards a faculty position is training in the classroom, right? Training on teaching. And I think many of these programs probably have at least some training towards teaching. I think you do get training, I think really good experience, as a couple of people have alluded to, on mentoring, right? Mentoring students. I think a lot of postdocs play a major role, in that But I think some of these programs where it's sort of pathway to faculty might have a little bit more training on the teaching. And I guess maybe the third thing that is you'll be evaluated on once you're a faculty member is this sort of service category. And again, that's probably not something you do much of as a faculty, but you may get a little bit of training on what does that mean? What does that look like? What are avenues to do that, in these sort of mentored faculty fellow positions, these sort of pathway to faculty position jobs.
Anjelica, if you could also add on to that with your experience as a lecturer while simultaneously a postdoc researcher.
Sure. Yeah, I initially wasn't going to do a lecture position, but I also wanted some experience lecturing, especially for one, just getting that experience in the classroom, and two, on my resume to have, designing homeworks and these presentations in front of a class. So I had TA'd a lot during my PhD and had a lot of teaching experience in that aspect, and I mentored a lot. So I wanted to incorporate that while I was waiting to start my postdoc. The postdoc I didn't accept, I didn't get this fellowship. It was a bridge fellowship at Northeastern University where they do a year postdoc and then you can apply as a faculty there or other places, but it kind of helps prepare you. And then I also applied for the Marie Curie Fellowship in Europe. It doesn't necessarily prepare you for faculty positions, but it gives you funding. And so that's attractive if you're interested in faculty positions, that's attractive for your packet to get external funding. The other note I had about this is they're preparing future faculty workshops. So a few different universities host those, and I went to a few of those webinars. I applied for a few, I didn't get accepted, but I think they accept a lot of postdocs because they're more in that transitional phase of getting ready for faculty. I definitely recommend looking at those. So I know Northeastern, it's like the Northeastern Preparing Future Faculty Workshop. There's an engineering one that's posted through Michigan, Delaware. There's like a soft materials one. If you Google them, I think they'll pop up. And I can email Mithun later some of the links so then you could pass that around maybe. But I attended a few of those. That was really helpful. A different number of faculty talked about their experiences. I think faculty that had been there for 20 plus years maybe didn't do a postdoc. And it really started becoming more common maybe the last 10, 15 years, where you do a training period as a postdoc for a year or two and then apply to faculty. Now I would say it's a lot more competitive. I applied for a few faculty positions before graduating, just to get the experience, but those packets helped me put together my faculty or my postdoc application packets and fellowships. So I'm a pretty organized person. So I think I just went really hard in the last year getting everything together. But it really is good, I think, in the future.
Great. Thank you. That's a lot of insight. So something that's interesting is that of the 4 postdoc scholars here, 3 of them have some kind of international, either they're going or they've come from an international place. So a question that was raised by the audience is how to find international postdocs, and is there any kind of obstacle to actually gaining them? Mehmet, if you want to answer that, you came from Turkey, right?
Yes. So to answer that question, like if we are directly coming from out of the country, looking at postdoc opportunity, well, I got my PhD degree from United States, but if I know the people that who graduated from the universities out of the United States, but that's kind of like a difficult situation because the problem is that, first of all, you should have a good networking before actually looking for the positions, if any available positions for postdoc in the United States. And to have a good networking technically, as we talked before as technically like you should have like a good number of publications that people you can meet with the people during the conferences, and you can make you can just build out the network with them, with the professors. And also being in the some of the like technical committees, I would say, like for instance in the engineering discipline, I would say like IEEE, for instance, like being inside those technical committees will definitely help you to build up the networks for applying the postdoc positions. And also, well, the name of your university, that matters as well, but actually your profile matters most technically. So whatever you put in your resume, technically that carries on during that process. What I would technically suggest that, for instance, like if you are looking for postdoc position in the United States, you're coming from the international background in the master degree, not only a master degree, for instance, and you don't have any PhD degree in the United States technically. What I will technically say that just you have to actually think in advance, contacting with the the professors, the programs that has postdoc positions available, because the process will take, because to come back to actually United States, that take you a lot. All the process, like visa process, everything, like you should think in advance the people that in United States more technically. That's what I say based on this question.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to chime in?
I can talk about, I found my postdoc on Twitter, but it's a lab that Carlos had visited last summer in France and kind of knew the person. And so for me to go abroad, I wanted to make sure that person was nice. They have a good reputation, they treat their students well. And Carlos said it was a very similar atmosphere to his lab. And I've been in his lab for 8 years, so that was reassuring. I talked to the students in the lab too before making any decisions. They all said, the PI is really understanding. In France, you get a lot of vacation, so it's like that's attractive to me. I have family over in Europe, so I can travel a little bit. The city itself, my husband has connections there too, so that was also a strong point where we decided to do that. I think one of the biggest challenges is just making that jump into moving to a new country. Obviously, the culture is different. You have to go through a visa process different depending which country you're coming from. The US going to Europe, it's a little bit easier, but I know there are people going from other areas or have different visa restrictions. But if the professor wants you and you're in a field that you have good experience in, it's a pretty smooth process. So I got lucky in that aspect that it's a similar field. They knew my work. They know Carlos. He's, well established in the field. So they trusted that. So it's more like they're trying to make me want to go there. But I think, yeah, Wolfgang, I think, has a maybe similar experience in that respect because he stayed in a similar field. So we can maybe talk about that.
Yeah, so it has actually been pretty similar with regard to those things for me. While applying to the position I'm in right now, I talked to like one of the big guys in our field. So our field is like pretty small. So quite a lot of people know each other, and there's like I mean like even personally, not just like from papers or like virtual conferences. And that one guy basically just while asking, well, I've applied here like at Ohio State, wherever that is. Back in the days, I had no idea. Yeah. And basically what he said, well, yeah, Carlos, he's a fine guy, he's a nice guy. And yeah, that was basically the confirmation on that side. And then with regard to the visa application process, so Germany and US, or like European Union and US, they have like pretty good relations. So that's also like one of the things you might remember when I initially said that like I got or like accepted the position like end of October-ish and started early January. And like this full visa process was like completely fine to put in those like few months but which also is like if the university, the PI in the university wants to get you because you have a certain set of experience and skills, they just make it happen and they sponsor you. And then, I mean, it's a lot of paperwork, of course. Half of it is just like you write like 12 times, what's your name, where were you born, date of birth, what did your parents do, all those things. And then a little bit about your background, and that's mostly it. And then it just takes some time for processing. You need to go to the embassy, but that's just like, I don't know, it feels like pretty standard stuff. You show up, they might have a few more questions, you just answer those. You just basically do what they tell you to do. And then, yeah, within a week later, I had the visa in my passport and was ready to go. So on that side, it was pretty simple. But just as a small caveat, this is like as a German coming to the States, so like other people might have way more challenging times or experiences depending on where they come from or where they want to go. Well.
I think
Thank you.
to
Yep.
to add to that, it's if you do have like a tough experience doing that, it's maybe like a risk reward. You know, like if you see that professor outputs a lot of faculty candidates and that's what you're interested in, then that's probably a good fit. If you see that maybe you talked to previous students, postdocs, alum, and they weren't placed where they wanted to be placed afterward, that's something to consider too. So that's something I had asked the advisors and said, you know, where did other postdocs go after this? And how are you going to prepare me for this situation? Yeah.
Thank you. A lot of insight there. What I'm hearing very strongly is networking is super important. So I have a list of questions that still remain. So in the interest of time, I'm hoping to keep this brief, but an important question is, and this might be best answered by the professors, but how long should someone be doing a postdoc, and when does it become too long? And it kind of sets off a red flag that, okay, something is wrong here.
That's a so yeah, I can start, Marcello, then you can add. Just one quick thing I wanted to add to the previous discussion with regard to, so I totally agree, networking is very important, and that was my experience also for the international postdoc. It was through a network, but the one thing I'll mention, it wasn't actually my advisor, it was another faculty member who I knew quite well, and sort of was close to my field, so he, you know, knew me well enough to say, oh yeah, this is a pretty good student. But it was really through this other professor, not my PhD advisor, that I got connected to the faculty member that I ended up working with in Germany. So I would encourage you, you know, as you're looking, you definitely want to talk to your advisor, get advice from your advisor, co-advisor, people on your committee. But think about, you know, are there other people that you can talk to, other faculty? Like I sort of became friends with this was a pretty new faculty that started like 6 months before I finished my PhD, and we just became friends. And he gave me a lot of good advice and actually connected me with my future postdoc advisor in Munich. So, but it's still networking, but you can network, you know, with other faculty in the lab that are kind of near or close to either the area you're currently in or maybe the area you want to go into. But yeah, to come back to the question about how long do you want to do a postdoc, this is also very field dependent. You know, I think a typical engineering postdoc, I'd say, is, you know, probably 2 to 4 years, I think, is a reasonable time scale for a typical engineering postdoc. Now, some postdocs in fields like biology, it might be a bit longer. Those can be like 5, 6, 7 years. And, you know, I say that because if you're in engineering and maybe closer to biology, right, that your postdoc might push a little bit longer and might be more the type. It's probably not going to be 6 or 7 years, but it might be more typical to be, say, 3 to 5 years as opposed to 2 or 3 years. But you know, I think in terms of red flags, I think the bigger red flag is if you have a significant amount of time where, you know, I think red flags would have to be like significantly beyond that for me. Like if you're in a postdoc for 6, 7, 8 years, but the big thing, if there's not a clear reason, an obvious reason for that, like if you've been super productive and you've been really boosting your record that whole time, I don't think that's a huge red flag, even if you're there for 5, 6, 7 years. People may ask the question and people may wonder, oh, this person could have moved somewhere else. But if they've been publishing strong that whole time, to me, that's still probably not a big red flag. So I would say, maybe the flags come if you sort of, maybe you published a few papers, but then you were there for 2 more years without, and your trajectory kind of started dropping toward the end or something. Those types of things to me are probably the bigger red flags.
Yeah, I agree with everything. Basically, Carlos summarized it all. What you're looking is, again, it's not that different from the way we are looking at a faculty who is on the trajectory for tenure, okay? You're looking at a sustained and potentially growing list of publications. So, and not only that, I mean, for a faculty, we're looking at many things, but for a postdoc, how are we evaluating throughput, number of projects that you work with, whether you have been supervising or mentoring, co-mentoring students, and also publications, and also it's getting more and more important now, participation in conference or technical committees and so on. So, because those is the natural progression towards tenure for our faculty. So we're clearly looking at where is your trajectory going, right? Are you continuing to publish, 2, 3, 4 papers a year? But at the same time, are you taking more and more responsibility? Or are you more or less steady in that activity, right? Also, a postdoc is a denomination for that is really it could be everything. But in the HR language of a university, at least at Ohio State, there are at least 3, 4 positions that you can transition into that are also an indication of your progression in career, because there is a basic postdoc researcher, that's an unclassified position, and then there is a research associate, senior research associate, and research scientist. So those 3 positions usually come with different salary ranges and also different responsibilities. So even if you are not in a faculty position, or you are staying quotation mark a postdoc, there are still formal HR terms, mechanisms that can show that your career has been in an upward trajectory.
Got it. That's a very interesting answer. So, so long as you make sure that it's productive, then you can explain it, and so it's okay. There's no hard and fast rule like 2 to 4 years or any such thing. Great. So,
sorry, Miten, I was just going to add one thing. In fact, because I think sometimes the other thing you see, it's rare, but it's getting even not uncommon for people to do 2 postdocs, right? But it like two, I think is, again, I don't think that would raise any red flags. 3 postdocs, maybe, right? Then maybe you start raising red flags again.
Yeah.
In fact, okay, why has this person been moving around and not sort of found a more permanent position? But it is, I think, not uncommon now to do 2 postdocs.
So yeah, I can actually speak for that too, because I was evaluating a person for a postdoc position, and when I saw the application, I actually noticed that would have been the 3rd postdoc in 3 years. So that right there, plus a phone call to the advisor, but that right there actually was already a pretty big red flag. Yeah.
got it. Thank you. So I do have a bunch of questions, but I also understand that the time that was allocated for this webinar is kind of done. So if anyone would like to drop off, I'd like to thank them first. But if not, I have a few follow-up questions that should be short. For one, how would you differentiate between a postdoc at a national lab, in a university, and companies like Amazon, or as you mentioned, tech-minded startups? So who should be applying to these kind of positions, and how do you differentiate between them?
So I can at least, again, I don't know if I have very definitive answers, but I can at least give my thoughts. So I think a postdoc at a national lab maybe would be pretty similar to a postdoc at a university. The small differences I would see is, often as a postdoc at a university, you might be mentoring younger graduate students and even undergraduate students. And you probably wouldn't have as much opportunity to do that at a national lab. Which I guess depending on your point of view, maybe is a good thing or a bad thing. You may have slightly more independence at a national lab. I'm just thinking of a couple people I know that have postdoced at national labs. Usually a national lab funding is maybe a little bit more sustainable or predictable, I guess I might say. Whereas in a academic lab, probably many people know, we're writing grants, lots of grants all the time. And then, the projects are driven often by what kind of funding, what grants get funded, right? And so you're oftentimes, if you're not on a fellowship, you might be at least working on a funded project. Then, you do have freedom often to work around those things, and you're often working on multiple projects. But I guess, you may have a little bit more flexibility at a national lab, that you're not necessarily tied to like a project that needs to get renewed, or a project where you need to write this report, to get the next cycle of funding. Maybe the other thing I'll say, I'm not sure about this, I believe national lab postdocs may sometimes be higher paid than an academic lab, than a university lab postdoc.
Yeah, I confirm that typical starting salary for postdoc in national lab is higher than in the academia. Yeah, and the other aspect, I think, Mithun, was also part of your question related to tech companies and startups.
Yeah, like for instance, Amazon has postdoc positions, and there are
Yeah.
startup companies as well that employ. Yep.
So yeah, kind of a rhetorical question, but if you are starting at Amazon, where do you want to go back to university? No, I'm talking about the moment that you get the first paycheck, and then you're looking at the salary range of a postdoc in the academia. Then, I mean, you would ask yourself all of the questions. But nevertheless, there is actually, in some areas, for example, computer science or ECE, there's a lot more opportunity for transitioning from industry to academia. A couple of years ago, in one of the American Control conferences, we organized a session that was specifically focused on people transitioning between academia, national labs, and industry. And we had all sort of combination. So that was a very, very interesting discussion. The part that is very remarkable about like a tech company, I'm not talking a startup here, I'm talking an Amazon or an Apple, is that they have a very specific structure in terms of what to expect, what are the expectations of a postdoc. That's because they have HR in those companies that is down to a science. And so the career progression, the tasks, review mechanisms are really, really clear and specific. There is nothing like that in the academia. It's very unstructured, very similar to actually a startup, where there are no clear rules, there are no established boundaries. And so you kind of have to hone your creativity, networking, and political skills to be able to move quickly in the directions you want. So I think in terms of experience, besides, the jokes on professors being underpaid compared to everyone else, I think it's really, what are you looking for in terms of experience, right? Are you looking for a very structured type of experience where you have a certain number of projects and mechanisms that clearly state how you're going to progress, what to expect, versus more of an unstructured environment where you might need to require more self-drive and organizational skills yourself, but where there is chaos, there is also opportunity, right? I think and postdocs in the academia, as we spoke already plenty, they can be so diverse and so interesting and so different that you need to ask these questions, what type of experience do I want to have? Because every professor or lab have different cultures and different ways of conceiving what the postdoc should be like.
Maybe just the one additional thing I'll add that I kind of had in mind when I mentioned this earlier is there are labs or institutes that are have a strong history of spinning out startup companies, either directly from the lab or from the institute. And so if you are interested in thinking about entrepreneurship, a postdoc in a lab that has started 6-7 companies before, right? Now there may be the downside to that, right? Which those are often these huge labs where maybe you get less face time with the PI, as Professor Canova mentioned earlier. But if you're really interested on doing entrepreneurship, that could be a nice opportunity. And there are institutes, for example, someone from our lab just went to do a postdoc at the Wyss Institute that's part of Harvard. And that, I think, has a really strong infrastructure. They have like in-house engineers that are designed. They sort of say, okay, how do we take this research project and get it out into a company? And so that's like a whole center institute that probably includes 15 to 20 labs, but they have a very strong culture for translational research and technology translation, and even moving into startup companies.
Great. Thank you so much. I have just one final question. It's kind of a concluding question, which is about, and it's for completeness. Who shouldn't do a postdoc? What are its disadvantages? For instance, if someone's end career goal is just a teaching-focused faculty position, should they do a postdoc? If someone wants to go to an R2 university, should they do a postdoc? If someone's confused, should they do a postdoc? So basically, who shouldn't do a postdoc?
Maybe just like one thing to mention for this list, like postdoc positions are quite often temporary, which can make it challenging to plan your life ahead. Basically, short-term positions can be like a half a year time. So especially if you go abroad and you can only plan for like very brief time ahead, that can be stressful. So if you believe to be stressed out by those things, or like might get distracted and worry too much about those things, then you will not have any time to make your like actual postdoctoral time like any useful or meaningful. So that would be at least one reason why you should not pursue like a postdoc. Of course, things might change. Like if you can apply for fellowship, or like if you get a fellowship, then you might have sufficient funding security for a slightly longer period of time. But this is like one thing that directly comes to my mind that is distracting many people. Like if you want to start a family and you don't know, okay, will I have a job next year? Those reasons are unfortunately very present.
Just to comment on one of the specific things you brought up, Mitun, is if you're very focused on a really teaching-driven career, I think a postdoc is probably not so necessary. You know, there may be reasons still to do it, but I would say in general, probably a postdoc is not totally necessary for someone that just wants to go to a teaching focused institution. And again, if your goal is to go to industry, I would at least think about a postdoc differently than you would think about it, you know, because often if you want to go into industry, you might think, what skill set, you know, what new technique or method, or, you know, what do I need to learn to get myself into the industry that I want to go into, or to open up new doors for new types of industry, as opposed to, you know, where am I going to go to publish a bunch of papers, right? Those are not necessarily like totally mutually exclusive things, but, you know, how you emphasize those two things, I think, would be different. And, you know, if you want to go to industry, I think it's worth applying, right? And then, you know, you can always think about applying to both the industry jobs and postdoc positions. And maybe through applying, you might learn a bit about, okay, what are the things that people are looking for, and how can I satisfy those things through a postdoc position?
I will add some points on that. Like, if I would not recommend like postdoc to someone postdoc, like if you have like passion for long-term research, like when you're coming to the end of your PhD, if you start feeling that, you know, you are like, I cannot be no longer doing a research. Technically, the postdoc is looking for researchers technically. So if you have a like passion for the long-term research, I will not recommend that. And if you set up, you have a non-academic career goals, technically, if you don't think going to academia, so 100%, that would be actually not a good idea to going to postdoc. And also, if you are looking for a life after PhD, just like, okay, I just go to the job like from 9 a.m. to 5, after 5 p.m., I will not do anything else. So if you're thinking like, oh, you will not do anything else, like after like 5 p.m., I will not do anything else. So that's not the, you know, the postdoc or academia. So, you know, you don't have a like it's structured, I would say, like a job life, like you just like 40 hours, you just work. It is not like that technically. So technically that job is carry on with you. Like it is not like ending up when you are done, like at 5 p.m. No, it is not like that. So if you are looking for a job after PhD, just very structured, like you will not work like after, you know, work. So that's not the postdoc actually do it, or in an academic track for any position technically. So you have to be first clear about that. Yeah.
My postdoc, everyone. Thank you for making me feel like I'm a slaver, but
No.
I mean, I think it's a reasonable point. There's not as much of a clear structure and division, but it has its advantages too, that like, you know, I'll speak for myself, you know, as a PhD student or postdoc, right? There were times often where I was, you know, working in the lab late at night or coming in on Sundays, but there are also times I was happy to take a 3-day weekend and say, you know, I worked a lot Monday through Thursday, so I'm going to take a trip with my friends this weekend. And, you know, of course, you mention it, right? But usually those types of things are okay if you're being productive and getting stuff done. Or right now, for example, yesterday my daughter was sick, and like it was fine. I stayed home, and like I didn't have to tell any. I mean, I told people that I was meeting with. I said, "Hey, I can't make this meeting, or can we meet on Zoom?" But you know, the other side of that, not, you know, but I am often working at night still, and that happens. That's real. But you know, that brings some flexibility with it.
Great. I think this session was extremely insightful. I learned a lot. I know I have to start looking into the research statements and everything like right now. But I hope it was helpful for everyone who attended. I think there was a lot of great insight that was shared. Thank you everyone for your time and also for staying with us for longer than the time that I'd asked of you. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. If people
Thank
have,
you everybody for participating, and thanks Mitun for organizing.
yeah, thanks, Meeting. Thanks, everyone. If anybody has follow-up questions, feel free to reach out.
Likewise.
Great. Thank you. I will be
Thank-
sending an update email to all the attendees. Thank you.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Have a
Bye.
nice rest of your day and week.
You too.
You
Bye.
too.